And we're back.
Welcome to episode 248 of No Direction, the No Direction Network's Pathfinder News, Reviews, and Interviews podcast. I'm Ryan Costello.
And I'm Jefferson J. Thacker, also known as Baron.
We got a GM with us today. We're talking GM style with Luis Loza. Luis!
Hello.
Hello!
Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for everything.
Of course.
You were recently GMing me on the Legend Lore one-shot that I've been milking into about 10 episodes of content.
Yes.
Thank you for that. And of course, you're our Valiant GM, which not only do you GM, but you also do little bits of GMing advice and behind-the-scenes things that I think really gives a lot of great insight into what you do as a GM. And so we're kind of taking one of those segments, making a whole episode about it. How does that sound?
Sounds good to me. Again, Ryan is stealing my potential content and making it his own.
You make it so easy for you.
I mean, there was that other potential content we stole when you ran us through the Guns and Gears playtest play. That was really fun.
So, yeah, I guess I'm giving everything to the network.
Should I be running these things by you, Luis, before I keep stealing from you?
It's fine. I don't mind. I get to just make jokes about him, which is just as fun to me.
For anybody who has not watched any No Direction in the past, Luis is the definition of chill.
Okay, thank you.
Actually, yeah. So, Luis, for anyone that may not be familiar with you, could you give a brief, let's say, 27-word description of who Luis Loza is? Go.
7 words. Luis Loza is a Paizo developer working on Last Omens line, and
I think that's 11.
Contributes to the No Direction Network.
16.
He's happy to be here today to talk about GMing.
Sounds about right.
Yay!
I guess the first question
that's
is
the inside book sleeve blurb, I guess, for this podcast episode.
So, do you
Do I
prefer
have to
GMing
start
with
making album
constraints?
covers now?
What's that, Ryan?
Do you prefer to GM with constraints or complete freedom?
Oh boy, I have fun with both, and that's the thing about GMing. I think I feel like a lot of people prefer one way or the other, but I have a good time with both of them. I run a regular game every Thursday for a home group that's at this point, tracing as far back as my origins with D&D 3.5. I have a player that was there for my very first game that is still playing with me. And that is, running APs or pre-written adventures and stuff. And I prep stuff as far ahead as I can there. And then sometimes I do things like do an entire session of Valiant with literally no notes and figure it out as we go.
You say no notes,
That's
but
impressive.
did you say they went off book or I guess off expectations for what you had planned?
Yes, but the episodes after that were entirely impromptu.
Okay.
You've yet to hear them, but you're about to. Yeah, the entire session after they finished the last bit of story, that
Glass Treader.
The Glass Treader stuff. Yeah, it was entirely no notes. We'll see what happens.
So we have a bunch of questions from Discord that I'm going to pepper throughout this conversation, but I think the first one that we should start with is from patron Jaina B, and she says, "What really defines a GM style anyway?" So, Luis, what does GM style mean to you?
I think it's a number of things. Is it, prep versus no prep? Is it props and, as much physical objects as you can, or is it, theater of the mind? Is it funny voices, or just, I don't bother with that because I'm not good at voices? It's a number of things. Ultimately, I feel like GMing is partly a performance. And I guess it really comes down to what your performance style is. Are you a what's the word? When an actor gets like a method actor, style, or are you just kind of an improv kind of style person, and everything in between?
All right, Pam, I took diligent notes with the microphone muted, so you probably didn't know what I was doing there. But let's start with, let's go down Luis's list of what defines GM style. Prep versus no prep, where do you fall?
I fall in the light prep to overboard prep category.
Okay, define light prep.
Light prep is a few notes and handy tools to help improvise when I need to go improvising, like lists of names, potential encounters, like a couple of notes of what characters I'd like to introduce and their motivations might be. Maybe a very loose outline of major plot points I'm hoping this sort of goes through, but it might or might not. It's like a sheet of paper, a sheet of paper of potential adventure. That would be my lightest prep. And then, like, complete overboard prep is a leather-bound GM journal with character art and backstory and everything divided into chapters with handy little tabs attached to them. And also usually printed on custom-made stationery.
Interesting. In chat, the baker is coming for you says they over prep the setting, light prep for actual game, improv during game. I think that's a fun breakdown. Over prepping a setting makes a lot of sense because you want to be able to improv consistently, and the better you know the world you're improving in, it makes sense that that would be where you want to have the most concrete understanding of what's going on.
That's kind of what I shoot for.
Ironically, I kind of do it in reverse. I guess it depends on what you call the setting. I over prep the immediate area around the characters, and everything that's in distant from them is maybe dragons? Question mark.
Lava Being has good advice. Write down all of your improv to add to the setting later.
Oh yeah, absolutely. If I go through making a cool map or an encounter or something that doesn't get used, like that goes into my folder of later.
How much time not at the game table do you focus on these folders, these notes, these things that you're talking about?
Probably about, I mean, this is a lot of where I have my fun playing the game, is in this stage as a game master. So before my first session of one of my campaigns, I probably spent 20-30 hours getting cool parts of it together.
20 to 30 hours. Wow. And I like that you had that number pretty well on hand. So you're aware of the time you're putting in, not judging you for putting time in. That's, like you said, it's how you have fun. Luis, is that about consistent with you, or do you put in more or less?
I feel like I end up front loading so much prep work because I'm running APs usually. I can end up prepping, and I have ended up prepping entire APs before session 1 hits the table. I have like this big old Google Sheets document that I've had going for many years now, where like each tab is a different AP. So like Rise of the Rune Lords, I went through every adventure and wrote down every single stat block that you find. So like, here's Goblin War Chanter, here's, so on through every book, and got the whole list, and then trim that down, because there's going to be 15 instances of Goblin that show up. But trim that all down. So like, here's every unique stat block that shows up in the entire AP. And then I prepped that into a giant document with all the stats. My entire Rise of the Rune Lords bestiary was ready to go before I started running it. And now that I'm doing a lot of virtual tabletop, I'm also doing all the maps and stuff in advance. And that means when the time comes to run it, I don't have to use any of that time flipping through to like find like, oh, do I have the right book for this? Go grab the right bestiary or whatever like that. It's just here and the stats are ready to go, and I can run, because I've grown so tired of having lost that much time in play in previous campaigns that I've run before.
And I think that is super important, that there's really 2 stages of prep that a game master goes through. There's the prep for the game as a whole, getting ready to run it, and that continues through the entirety of the game. You're always helping develop it. This is reading your adventure path. This is taking your notes. This is coming up with your cool ideas. This is outlining your big picture version of the game you're about to run. And then there's the immediate, we're playing in an hour, what do I need to do to get ready? And those 2 things are both important, and I think that second one is more important.
Okay, why is that?
because that's the one that's going to directly affect how much enjoyment your players are going to have at the table. It doesn't matter if you read through all of Rise of the Rune Lords or you custom wrote this really cool campaign that's 15 chapters long and you've got all the names translated into actual Elvish ready to go. If you're not ready and you spend, like, every time they want to do something, you have to spend 10-20 minutes searching through your notes, then it's just a slog.
See, that is why I don't take notes. You have seen me anytime I have to work with notes, and all I am doing is looking at the notes, and it drives me crazy. And anytime my eyes aren't on the players, I get anxious because I am aware that I am not engaging with them. Because I feel like GMing isn't just a performance; you're hosting the game, and you have to be attentive to the people that are at your game. You are the person that is in charge of their fun and their evening. And eyes on the page is not eyes on the people, and that's when I feel like I'm failing as a GM. And my memory for things that I've written down is worse than things that I've not written down. And so writing them down, thinking like, oh, maybe this will help me later, does not, makes it worse.
And I agree with you on that point. Well, the part of your responsibility part, I've been criticized a lot on this, having this point of view, but like GM's foremost responsibility is to make sure their players have fun at the table, and anything you're doing that kind of detracts from that is something you should look at improving. And if that means not being prepared, that's one of the worst and easiest way to ruin a game.
Jana B's wondering if I'm part goblin. Writing something down takes the words out of my head. That is one of the greatest explanations for why I hate writing things down.
I love it. This explains our bumpers.
I would suggest that that should be expanded a little bit, and the GM should also be included in the fun. That, like,
yes, yeah,
not
you are
just
responsible for everyone's fun at the table. That includes the GM.
Yes. So don't go out and break your back just to make sure that everyone else but you is having a good time. You got to include yourself as well.
Right.
Find your own fun in that.
Param, you were saying that you've been criticized, or you've heard it criticized.
I've been criticized by saying that phrase several times, actually. Why? That is the GM's primary responsibility to ensure players have fun. Because somebody always comes back with the make sure the GM has fun angle, as if that's mutually exclusive thing. Like some people that, I don't know. I don't know why they get combative about it, but it's like, I think that there's definitely a crew of people that we do know that there are combative GMs in the world that just really enjoy making their players suffer.
There might be an argument for like, well, you're the GM and you're meant to be neutral, and if things are going bad and people aren't having fun, that's not your fault. That's because that's how the dice rolled or whatever, or something like that. But
and that's how you have an empty table.
Yeah, right. The idea is also not that you are giving your players their every whim and just catering to them. Like, they are there for part of the challenge. They are there for the losses, so that when they do win, it's not losses, but for every missed attack makes the hit that much bigger. And that is the art of GMing, that making sure that you are crafting it so that you funnel to the fun crescendo, the peak of the fun moment.
Yeah, I mean, there's a story I've told on the network before about my Gen Con Blue Dragon. You know this story, don't you, Ryan?
You know what? You're gonna have to remind me. I know.
Okay,
I remember you buying the Gen Con Blue Dragon.
Okay, so like, running Rise of the Rune Lords, since we're saying this, I knew this big at the middle point of book 6, you have to fight this big old humongous ancient blue dragon, and it's like one of the very few opportunities that a GM has to legitimately throw down a gargantuan dragon on the table. And so I was like, I know that they make this dragon. I'm going to go get it. This was before the Shadowed Star Blue Dragon existed. So this is the old, this is back when I could buy this thing for $50 and that was considered expensive. And now this thing goes for like $400. But anyway, so I went and scoured Gen Con to find this blue dragon for this game. My players knew I was looking for this blue dragon. They didn't know. They kind of could guess why, because it's on the cover. But you get the idea. So it's time to play. The blue dragon hits the table. They all know the story that I busted my butt at Gen Con to make sure that they had this dragon to fight. And the dragon, one of my players who plays a ranger, pulls out a dragon slaying arrow that's in book 2 of that adventure and kills it in one go. And I did my whole, oh, my dragon. And I played it up and everything, all disappointed. and my players, they had a fantastic time with it. And to this day, they still taunt me about my big expensive blue dragon that sits right here in the game room for them to point out and taunt about. 7 years later, they're still telling stories about me hunting for that blue dragon and them killing it one hit. And like, it's upset me. I'm getting 7 years of players bragging about a story point. That dragon was worth every penny.
Also sounds like you've got some combative players. Remind them that you're supposed to have fun at the table too, pal.
Oh no, I want them to have fun, and if they don't know they're being manipulated like this, then they don't need to know.
They listening? Param, I know you've got questions about how I run a game.
Yes, because we were talking about prep, and you don't.
No,
you don't. You don't even prep to improvise, which is what I considered to be the prep.
Strangest idea to me. Prepping to improvise. Improvise is in the moment. It's a response.
No, but like if you know the world that you're playing in, or the adventure you're playing in, or the setting, that's what I did with Valiant. Is I took the time to figure out like the town that they're in and kind of the surrounding region. So then when the time came and they said, "Hey, we want to talk to someone about something," I had an idea of like who a character could be, and then I could improvise with that. I don't necessarily know like the background of that character and, you know, their daily schedule or anything, but having set up in advance by like, here's the smith and here's so and so, it facilitated my improvisation when the time came for that.
And like, even I, like, when I do improvised games, I have my name stick. I have a little deck of filing cards of abandoned or just random thought out encounter ideas that I can just reach in and grab if I need to jog my memory. I've got a little list of random character descriptions so that I can just pull out, like, and he's got a crooked tooth and it hangs out behind his scarred lip, and all these details that would be very hard for me to just like pop off at the minute. So I have all these tools available for when I need to run with quote unquote no prep. And I was surprised that you didn't use these things.
We talked about Reggie Watts' theory of the auxiliary brain.
No, I've never heard of this.
Okay, Reggie Watts is a comedian, and often he will conclude. He's a stand-up comic, and often he'll end his bits with an improvised song. And he just has this recorded device on the stage with him, where he will just like beatbox. He'll make a little bit of a rhythm that he'll record, and then he'll play it on repeat, and they'll go on to performing his next thing. And the way he describes it is that he's got his active brain, who is working the machine and making sure that, you know, it's working musically, and he's creating the song according to the rules of creating a song. And then he's got his auxiliary brain, which is creating the song as he's doing it. And that is how he's improvising a song live, and he creates a unique song for every single performance. And he says at the end that people come up to him and like, "Oh yeah, I was there when you performed such and such a song." And he's like, "I didn't name these. The people listening named them. I have no idea what they're talking about, because I'm never fully aware of the song. They are the only people that are actually fully aware of what's going on with this song." And that is like, I related to that very much as a GM, in that I will be listening with my active brain to like, what are the players saying? What is happening in the scene? And then the auxiliary brain is like, where are the dots that I need to connect? What do I anticipate coming up that I'm going to need a witty reply to, or I'm going to need something. And like that's just it. Like I cannot, or I either can't pack up that auxiliary brain with everything because I need it fresh for whenever I'm in the moment, or that auxiliary brain is constantly full of stuff and I'm just pulling from it whenever I need to.
I don't have two brains, Ryan. I've got one brain.
So you need an auxiliary brain. How many brains does your computer have?
It has one very terrible brain that just is terrible quickly.
Oh, okay. But wouldn't it be better if it had a second brain doing some of the backup thinking?
It does. That's called a video card. And it is also terrible, but it's terrible in a different way, but better at math.
I feel bad for your computer. I didn't know it was so terrible.
That's the thing. People like to say computers are smart, but computer scientists, people that actually program computers and build them and all this jazz, we know computers are stupid. They're just stupid very fast.
All right. Does that answer your question? Do you have further questions about how I can go into a game with no prep?
I mean, it kind of answers the questions and also astounds me at the same time. It's like, it's impressive, but like, you like, I could never come up with half the crap you've run me through with weird brain crab monsters and a sheep farm duel with warlocks in a barn. I mean, you've put me through some really creative stuff. And how do you handle, like, Pathfinder is not an easy game to run off the cuff. It's got a lot of baggage attached to it, a lot of math and characters and monsters that need to have stats and stuff. How do you just, if you don't prep any at all, what is your reference material? I mean, you can't make a critter in your head. Well, you couldn't in first edition, at least.
I disagree. You totally can in first edition. So a lot of, and I still prefer first edition to second edition. A lot of that is because a lot of first edition numbers are subtextual. And if you understand the subtext of the numbers, it's easy to improvise them. Whereas in second edition, a lot of it is more superficial. And so you have to remember the exact thing you're engaging with every single time. And that is a lot harder for me. So just getting how the monsters work in first edition made it a lot easier for me to improvise them on the fly. Not that I did that too often.
But I see there, you were prepped to improvise because you understood how the monsters work.
But I didn't. Okay, I was prepared to do that, but I didn't prepare. It was
no, exactly. But you had that foundational knowledge that you could pull upon that you can use to improvise, which is basically what we're doing. We just happen to like focus our energy to do that intentionally rather than like
I loved the aha moment. I
caught you. also that is a skill that has been honed and developed through 20 years of working with the D20 system. That is, how on earth did you get started, is I'm curious about.
I did not care as much about the system early on. So in 3.0, 3.5 days, I would just kind of eyeball hit points and AC and whatever, and just, I got called out on it enough times, like Matt especially. Matt Belanger used to host 3.5 Private Sanctuary with me. He'd be like, wait a second, a 24 hit? But my 24 didn't hit. And I had no reason other than I felt like the person that got the 24 this time needed a win, and Matt didn't. And so slowly I got more familiar and got the system a little more naturally ingrained into my brain.
Yeah, no, that system mastery is the same as like a setting mastery, setting understanding that you can just pull upon. And honestly, that's what I do a lot in the end. Is like, I feel like I understand the auxiliary brain thing because I am putting stuff, like connecting dots together as I'm like figuring out where people are going and stuff. It's something I really saw manifest because I haven't done a lot of like improv GMing or anything like that beyond like Lauren asking me to GM something in the middle of an episode, right? Beyond that though, I think there's always something I can pull upon, but because I have that knowledge, it's easy to make those connections and kind of throw things together that make sense, and then I polish them as I have time as I'm going forward.
And so I just said that the auxiliary brain is either always empty or always full, depending on how you look at it. And so I am constantly like remembering things that I think would make an interesting moment at a game table. That was something I'll tell an anecdote that I may have told before, but when I was in Japan, we were visiting a castle. And when they were building the castle, the Lord ordered all rocks in the kingdom brought to the construction site so that they could build the castle. And when they did not have enough rocks, they used gravestones. And I was just like, well, that's a haunted castle. That's an origin story for a haunted castle. Anytime I need a haunted castle, it's because they took the gravestones, and the bodies that were living there did not appreciate that. And so, I'm on a trip to Japan with my wife and my friend, and it's just like I'm taking notes for someday I may need this in a game. I had a more recent one that it's bugging me that I'm not remembering.
We're about to see like 1,000 different haunted castles now after that story, because it's such a cool idea.
Oh, no, I remember the other one. The other one was Monkey Island. So Tina was playing Monkey Island 2 over the Christmas holiday because we just picked them up on Steam. And I noticed that in Monkey Island 2, at one point, Guybrush Threepwood goes to a town and all the buildings are kind of nautical. And I already had in my head that I wanted to run a campaign on a fairly isolated small island because I wanted to do like this major worldwide event, and I didn't want to have to deal with the whole world. So the setting was definitely going to be a fairly small island. And I got the idea, what if the pilgrims coming here are on boats that are designed to be taken apart, and you make your houses out of the boats when you got there. Like the boats are the lumber. They're never planning on return trip. And so I had a very I that may even be what the origin on that city was in Monkey Island, and I just didn't know it. But like just that visual was like that's something I can borrow and use in a game someday, and that would just make an interesting moment. And if they have follow-up questions, I can figure out answers just based on that one sentence description there. I have enough fuel there that I can pull ideas out of the auxiliary brain.
So I guess we've talked about a bit about how we prep for games generically. What about specifically, Luis? You were getting Valiant together, and it is an impressive, original adventure in a fascinating setting. How did you get this together? Like, what were you thinking putting an adventure like this towards us?
Well, the initial stages were realizing, okay, I need a kind of headquarters town style, a place where adventures start and where things kind of sprawl out from there. So of course I wrote a generic fantasy RPG starting town. It just happens to be a Western theme rather than any other ones that you've seen in other places. It's no Sandpoint or Atari or anything like that. But I gave it everything that I felt that people would need. So it's like, okay, it needs a smith, it needs a general store, it needs a magic shop, it needs some kind of representative that most classes can kind of attach to. So someone that's a druid can go speak to so and so, someone that's a wizard can speak to a different person. And then from there, it's like, let's just throw plot hooks at it and pop them down, and we'll see if anything comes of it. Because I was intentionally hoping to create kind of an open thing that the players would see, like, oh, there's a bathhouse that is secretly behind closed doors is a bordello, right? And maybe people will latch onto that and stuff. So I see that Rob occasionally mentions that, like, oh yeah, Ev goes and hangs out at the bathhouse for the evening. And it's little details like that, and see where they go from there, because that's the approach that I've grown accustomed to with writing for Paizo and Pathfinder and stuff. It's just throw as many plot hooks as you can into something, and someone eventually will make use of it, right? Whether it's me or my players or someone else. If this ever goes to publication, who knows? Then there's plot hooks for other GMs to use too, right? Yeah, that was the start. And then I had no plot in mind beyond like the initial blow them up at the mine so they get their cool magic essence power, and we'll see what happens from there. And other than that, it's just been like kind of following along with the players and seeing what happens, which is really different than anything I've ever done. I haven't done homebrew since 4th edition D&D days. And that was mostly an excuse to, like, hey, the new PHP is out, let's try out the new classes. Luis, can you come up with something? All right, sure, I'll come up with an adventure on the drive home from the game store, so we have something to play in an hour once everyone has a character built, something like that. So it's been interesting and fun, but I don't know if I would consider that my approach, because I don't think I've done this enough to say that that's my approach for coming up with stuff.
Valiant was, when you pitched it, it was called Dust, right?
Yeah, I mean, that was an initial idea for it, just because I think it kind of gave the themes of Western a better feel for that Western theme than Valiant necessarily.
But isn't it also like the turning point that got them their powers
was
Dusty?
Dust.
Like,
yes, they called it Dust internally in the setting, so that's why I was going to lean towards that. But some other podcasts that's pretty popular had that as a story arc name, so I figured it's just avoid getting any people pointing fingers and being like, you're just copying them.
Well, what I do like about that is that you had this moment planned. Even it was in like 3rd or 4th session, right? It wasn't even right at the beginning.
It was
fairly close.
The very first proper session. So we did the prequel kind of thing that got lost or whatever, just as like a, hey, let's get to know our characters and try out Roll20 so people know how to play it, so when we do our proper session. But yeah, that the first session ended with them getting the power there. Like that, it was, you know, hour 3 of our first 4-hour session or whatever was that happening.
So what I liked is that you had a moment planned. You knew, like, dust is very visual, it's very tactile, like you can get a feel for a moment that was dusty.
Yeah.
And so you were going to name the whole podcast around that. So is that something that when you're planning out a campaign or a session or whatever, you have like a single idea that you're like, this is a tentpole idea, this is load bearing?
Yes, absolutely. I have a number of them. The artwork for the banner for Valiant is one of those. The moment where they fight the glass treader was supposed to be one of those, but it got changed. There's always like a specific moment that I'm hoping to shoot for, and then if things change. But at least with that, I have a minimum of structure that I can like build things upon and work towards, to hopefully guide things until everyone derails it.
You had 3 other points on the how you defined GM style. So the second one was props and physical objects or theater of the mind. And where do you fall on that?
I'm light on props. I don't really like go out and get the Dwarven Forge full, you know, tiles and all that stuff and have a cape that I use or anything. So I use a combat grid, and that's about all I need. I guess minis and or tokens or whatever. But beyond that, I don't go very crazy. I know there are people that have fog machines and they have scented candles of like, you know, you're in a forest, so here's the forest scented candle. Or there's like specific like role-playing focus ones now. They're like dank dungeon scented candle and stuff. It's
like called
that.
Dungeon Sense, and it's like beads. You open up the jar and it fills the room.
So I don't
often with a soapy smell,
that.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, I don't go that far. I think at most I've had like a prop sword or something that I use once. It's like, oh, here's the MacGuffin sword that you're going to use you have to deliver it as part of your quest or something. But beyond that, I've done a lot of theater of the mind. I once ran an entire session of Pathfinder in a van driving towards Seattle for PAX many years ago. So I came up with a story and we just kind of had to run with it. There's no room for that in a van with 7 people, so we just did it all theater of the mind. So I do it a lot, and occasionally I do that because I don't want to draw a map, and drawing maps takes anywhere from, you know, 10 seconds to several minutes. If I have to replicate a map from an AP, I just complain and grumble the whole time. You can ask Ron Lundeen or Eleanor or some of my other coworkers about me constantly grumbling that I have to draw this map as I get them into the next area.
I have complaints about the AP maps.
Me too. Mostly because I have to draw them.
They love not easy to draw walls. They love way too tiny corridors and rooms to fight in.
They love 1 square is 10 feet. So you forget halfway through that it's 1 square is 10 feet and you've been drawing it as 1 square is 5 feet, and then you have to retry it. But I get why you need to do that, and I've had to submit my own maps for my own AP that's 1 square is 10 feet, and I had to just grin and complain like, I can't believe I'm doing this, but I have to.
Part of the problem.
So ironically, this was so much of a problem that when I started drawing my own maps, one of the earliest things I made was a grid that was the exact grid of a Paizo flip map and had the fold lines extra thick, so I could use the fold lines for reference, so that any map I sketch out on that little piece of template can be quickly transferred over to a flip map without the same problems I have getting the Paizo AP ones translated.
I love virtual tabletop now. I can just plop it in and it's ready to go, and then I don't have to draw it, and then I can just
especially when the adventure is ready for you. That makes my life so easy. It's just like it's all done. All the hard part's done.
I made a face when Luis
talked about
fog machines.
So I am the GM that goes overboard with the props and the I find that the aesthetic of the play experience helps everything involved. So I don't just hand out character sheets. I make folios. I don't run from a Mead notebook. I have custom leather journals made for each campaign I'm going to run long term. Even when even simple things like making sure my handouts are printed on parchment paper instead of just A4 easy to grab white paper, or things like that. Just everything I can do to just make it a little bit more special or a little bit more in the theme of things, I find helps make sure the players are having fun and helps keep them in the mood. I mean, it's the reason that this game room looks like a tavern in every way that I was able to do it. It's the reason that the first time I ran Starfinder at a convention, I made little sock puppets of all the major characters so that I could go and it was my players appreciate it.
And that wasn't just gibberish. You learned Dwarven.
I mean, technically it was
Space Dwarven.
I had to learn Vesk. And Vesk is a whole lot of
yeah.
You don't know, but Vesk is based off of Peanuts adult.
Makes sense.
And then the Skittermanders are the Peanut kids?
Yeah, that's why it's perfect English.
Okay. But I'm getting my Starfinder lore right? Skittermanders live on the Veskarium?
Yes, you got that right.
Good job.
So good at this.
And it's the reason that my hero points, thank God that y'all made these really cool campaign coin hero points, because before then I was going and getting clay poker chips and custom printing inlays. Now that I have a 3D printer, I am cursing that I don't play in person, because I've designed so many little props for things that it's just like, next time my player has like a cool badge or they join a secret society, they are getting decoder rings.
So you pointed to your background, and my background is also a very good indication of how my brain works, because here you've got this shelf, which is everything is perfectly lined up. There's symmetry to it. It's gorgeous. Then you've got this shelf, which has got Hulk, a unicorn, and a bunch of guys just lying on down because it's not set up. I don't know what to do with it, and I don't know. So I just leave the chaos there. And so most of the time my sessions will just be that. It'll just be, here's a splatter of miniatures. They don't make any sense, but you can recognize that this guy in the light, he's in a martial arts gi. We'll pretend it's a wizard's robe. Just look at him. He's the clothy guy, so you can remember that. And then every once in a while, I'll do something like when I ran the Lantern Lodge's retirement scenario, and I learned how to fold an origami lantern for the Lantern Lodge members for their mission, their faction mission. And like, it blows people's minds when I do that. Not that what I did was any more impressive than what you do on a regular basis, Param, but just that it's so much better than what I do on a regular basis. It's nice to see when I put the effort in it. But it's not a question of effort. It's a question of knowing what the final product would be like when I start it is the only way that I'm going to know that I'm going to actually be able to get start to finish.
I think another thing that came into play for me, at least in terms of like props and minis and all that stuff, is this at the time when we were really getting into the game, we were broke, so we had, I think, something like a dozen miniatures between the collective group. So we even had like a little sticker marked under them to be like, okay, well, this is so and so's miniatures, and these are Luis's miniatures, and we have like 6 together. And just the same big fire elemental was every large creature we ever fought, because that's all we had. And then eventually we got 2 or 3 more. And now that I work with Paizo, like I can get the pawns as part of compensation for doing the work here. So I have all the pawns and stuff available. But like, I think that instilled into me just like we make do with what we have, and if I can get fancy, I will here and there, but I know that my players and what I'm used to doing runs just fine if we don't get fancy.
I think that's the reason that I have a lot of the GM gaming and even no direction skills I have, is because I was also very broke, and in Eastern Kentucky, we don't have much money down here. Yeah. I mean, there's a reason that they still use this region for when they need to crack a joke about it. And I've got like I learned to draw maps and use map software and free software
Make spell
because I
cards for
couldn't
yourself.
afford it.
Yeah.
Make my own spell cards. I didn't buy a game room. I built it with my own two hands. They were such strong hands. And like that's why I'm 3D printing minis. Like I have money now, but like I'm always kind of half the time I pitch things, I'm trying to get better at it. But Ryan, you can usually vouch for this. Some of the times I'll pitch a solution that's like, we could do this, and we can buy this, and then I can build this, and we can do this thing that's incredibly complicated. When the correct answer is probably to buy something that does it instead of trying to improvise a solution.
Well, I know one example was when we were going to tag articles with whether they are 1E, 2E, or Starfinder, and you were like, oh, but the programming involved in making that kind of automatic tagging, whatever, back-end device. And it's like, or you just copy and paste. It takes 2 seconds. Yeah, you have to do it every time, but it's 2 seconds.
And yeah, so like, necessity is the mother of invention. And honestly, I'm a little worried about today's generation where we have all these cool newfangled thingies. How y'all gonna learn how to sculpt your own minis out of ears wax?
I'm happy for the younger generations that can just turn to D&D Beyond and have their stuff ready to go, rather than like find some other weird program that like maybe has enough rule books to put together what you want or something like that.
And I'm happy you use that old man voice, because the third point Louis brought up of what defines GM style is funny voices or don't. That's what I wrote here. Funny voices or don't.
Used to be don't, and then I met you, Costello.
Okay. You know what? I never even thought to use funny voices until Matthew Binks was GMing me in a vampire game in, I guess I was in college at the time, and it was just like, oh, this brings the world to life in ways that I can do. And so just it's just changed how I approached the game. And from then on, it was definitely, you can't have a GM or you can't have an NPC without a funny voice, even if it's just like an archetypal funny voice. You still need to, or I still need to really switch into the different characters to just keep things organized in my head, to help portray things to my character, to my players. Because again, I do not give them visual cues. I do not give them props. So the only thing they have to really know which NPC they're talking to is how I'm performing them. And the voice is a real shortcut for remembering who we're talking to.
Voices, at the very least now, because I'm doing so many online games, we don't do video calls. We just hop onto like a voice channel, so like we're not seeing each other. So at the very least, voices help differentiate between I am GM Luis explaining things and I am in character doing something else, even if it's just, a deeper tone or whatever. But just having that obvious shift helps, I think, or at least I would hope it helps. And no one's ever said that, stop doing that or anything, but that helps out. And I think we've had just a lot of fun over the years doing voices, and the more you can do to inject more fun into your game just is great. I had a friend who played a wizard, very old classic style wizard, but hammed it up so much. And he had, the wizard would always talking like this, talking about his spellbook and his magic and all. Just
no, Louise, I don't think I appreciate you bringing this up right now.
And it's great. I love doing voices. I love hearing it crack us up every time, and it just added so much more fun and made it so much more enjoyable. So I'm pro voices, but I'm also pro, you don't have to do a voice if you don't want, but I'm going to do a voice as often as I want to.
It's a tool in the toolbox, but it's definitely not required.
Yes.
Good storytelling can be done without the voices. It's a quick shortcut. And I agree with Ryan. It's a way for me to key into their personality instantly, which is why I usually have a set phrase I've developed for every character, a catchphrase that is in their voice, so that I can very quickly switch to their personality. Glanville is literally just that's it. That's literally the phrase that I have to say before each adventurous session before I can do it. And the other thing I do for voices, and this isn't original at all, but how I always do my voices to keep them consistent and to also keep the characters from picking up on it is to do a celebrity impression badly. Like badly enough they don't recognize it's an impression, but at least you know, oh, that's my terrible Jay Leno, and that's that Hobbit.
Yeah, I had Matt's character's dad was supposed to be a Jack Nicholson impression, and he's like, "Is that Michael Douglas?" And I'm like, "Sure."
Well, now you're ready if you ever need to do a Michael Douglas impression, I guess.
No, that'll probably end up sounding like Jack Nicholson.
Oh, there you go.
Performance style, method, improv, question mark. That's where we're leaving off there. And then we've got our suite of cool questions from our Discord chatters. So we were kind of already touching on that when we were talking about voices, about you can embody a character without having to put on a silly voice, and that is the character's voice. It is just in a different interpretation of that, is a different acting style. But there's definitely a way that you can bring out a character just by changing your posture, just by changing or switching to a catchphrase, like you were saying, Para.
And a way of speaking that isn't a funny voice. Like, do you articulate every word of a sentence? Just if somebody is that can be a thing. If it's always that conniving assistant to the Duke who always articulates every single word of every single instruction he gives us. It doesn't have to have a funny accent. You can just articulate or change your voice rhythm is a good way. You can stretch out the words when you need to anticipate a maybe more down to earth kind of fellow.
You ready to take some of these questions?
Yes.
All right. Katie Stafford Randall, how do you alter the description of spells to fit the mood of a scene or campaign? Luis.
I don't do any of that usually. I most of the time I'm very casual in how I run things with at least with my home group. I don't bother saying, he lifts his hand and starts moving them about, and ice swirls around them as he shoots off a icy ray of magic, stuff like that. I want to move on to the next thing and the next thing. So I don't need to slow down combat by describing every single action and say every single NPC's attack and stuff like that. He shoots a ray of frost at you. It misses. All right, next turn. I will, of course, describe other things when I feel it's important, if only to bring attention to them. I guess the fact that I don't ever describe them means that when I do describe something, I guess it means it's significant. But for the most part, I don't bother with that, other than occasionally using it to kind of differentiate someone by, you've seen someone cast Ray of Frost before, but never like this, and shows off that it's got something significant about it.
Sure.
I like to lean into the C.S. Lewis method of describing things, which is you describe a couple of the important things that you want to use to frame the feel of what you're going to, but you don't need to go into like every single detail, which would be the Tolkien method of describing things. So it's just like, and there's decadent pudding and roasted pheasant and all the things you expect at a feast would be an example of a C.S. Lewis description, where you poke out a couple of the points and then let the players fill in the rest with their minds. So if the aforementioned ray of frost, it could be something as the chilling ray pierces through you as his arcane ritual continues, and that's all I would need to do. And it would change based on what I'm trying to set. So if I was running a horror campaign, it could be like the numbing death radiates through your chest as a spell hit home. It would be a different way of describing it.
So I try to latch onto the emotions of the players at the table. And so if they're having a conversation and the players are in a goofy mood, I'll be the straight man in the scene, even if like that wasn't the original intent of that NPC. Like, all right, he'll be the one that's just a little more oblivious than he probably should be. They can get their zingers in a little more easily. If we're in the middle of a combat and it's going well for the PCs, then whenever the PCs hit something big, you just like emphasize that, oh, the monsters are really they're really struggling now. They're really starting to get worried. Whereas if, like, let's say there was a clutch fireball that really changed things into the PC's favor, then you describe like, all right, so these confident monsters were really closing in on you. But then, like, with this pop of fire and this smoke that you see is getting in their eyes and they're tearing up, and you don't know if they're tearing because they realize what is about to happen to them or if it's just the smoke blinding them. You're pretty sure it's because they realize that you are a fireball tossing wizard and things are about to get very fireball-y.
I love that your descriptions have the personality. It's like your world is a separate character that's making commentary. Your games always run like that, and I love it.
Yeah, no, I never thought of it like that, but yes, I definitely agree. And yeah, cool, thank you.
Sorry for the disruption there, but no, that's another example. It's like you always do that, and it's wonderful, and it shows up in your characters too. Whereas when I'm playing characters, it's like it's honestly like I'm trying to be a little mini assistant GM, and I'm just throwing spotlight during downtimes to other characters to give people opportunities to show off when I think that when I can see that the GM is about to stutter or needs a break, or could definitely use some time to check that note to see if this was the right NPC or not.
Yeah, and I've been on the receiving end of you passing the ball like that, and sometimes I know I've dropped it because it's just like, what are we? Why are you asking me about magic spells right now? But other times, yes, it's led to nice little scenes that do give Crystal and Adventurous or give our GMs some time to put some things together.
What about you? What is the game like at the table for you, Luis? Like, we know what the ones you record are like. Is that a typical Luis Loza, or is not at all?
No, not at all. Well, hold on. It depends which Luis Loza, because something like the one shot for Legend Lore is different than Valiant, I think.
Okay, let's take Valiant as the baseline. Okay.
Then they're more.
And what
like
is this like if we were to hang out at PaizoCon? What would that game be like?
If it's something that is a time slot, if it's time, if there is a hard cutoff, I try to keep things at a quicker clip than usual. But for the most part, I am content to let the players take their time and do their own thing. And you get that a lot with Valiant. I think a lot of people have pointed out that there's a lot of time for characters to speak with each other and figure out their plans and kind of do whatever they want. Partially because anytime that they are talking with each other, it means I don't have to do anything. And also just because there's no reason to hurry them up. There are times when I will do things like, hey, you're doing your medicine checks to heal up. I don't need you to actually roll that. We can assume you're going to get that all taken care of and stuff like that. That there's don't worry about rolling that. Or you make it from, town A to town B just fine. I don't want to run random encounters or there's no need for anything that happens along the way. It's an uneventful trip. Let's move on. But beyond that, I'm content to let people take their time, do that. But something like the one shot where I have 2.5 hour block or something, and I need to get to the end of a story by the end of it, I will, speed things up. I will fudge dice, and sometimes people will have a lower AC all of a sudden. That's now lower for the rest of the encounter. I know I said that a 24 hit, but now it turns out also a 23 hits, and we're just gonna go with that. And they have 10 fewer hit points or something, stuff like that, to speed things up, cut things here and there. I will say you all get together and go to the warehouse and don't bother figuring out marching order or anything like that. We'll worry about that when it comes to it if it needs.
So I'm just going to point out, patron Lidis actually had a question about this. Said, what do you do with dead space for players to fit? Or sorry, when do you leave dead space for players to fill? When do you stop dead space or slow conversations to move the sessions forward? And he adds the note that from what he's seen of my and your jamming styles, Luis, he suspects the answers would be quite different. But like you said, most of the time that people have heard me jamming, I am on a time crunch. And so I am like, I am a high energy GM, but like, the actual play GMing that I've done is exceptionally high GM, exceptionally about momentum and keeping things going.
Yeah.
But I do remember in the one shot, there were several moments where we got to indulge in being Stabby's group and what that means, and coming up with some plans where it really just felt like we were totally in control. And I think because the one shot was all about getting new players to try try Pathfinder Second Edition, a lot of them for the first time. I think that got them comfortable with the idea that they're playing a game. They are playing a character before they're playing the system.
That's
and so
partially
then
what I wanted to do there. Yeah.
Well, it was very successful.
Thank you. Yeah. So yeah, most of the time, I feel like I've grown to be able to sense when the lull of we're still talking about coming up with a plan, but if I let it go on, people will just kind of peter off, and then we'll sit here for another 5 minutes while nothing more productive happens. I feel like I know where that point, that cutoff is, and say, okay, it sounds like you have a plan. I'm going to move ahead. You can tweak it as you go if needed, but let's go on.
Yeah, there was definitely a campaign that Jay was running. Jay, who was also an old Private Sanctuary co-host, the original Private Sanctuary co-host with me. And there was a conversation we had with an NPC. We pulled off the plan, and then we were just in the room with this NPC, and it just felt like, well, I guess we're still talking to this guy. And in that little extra stuff where we didn't have a plan and didn't really want that conversation to keep going, we said something that ruined the plan, completely changed the trajectory of the campaign. And it was just like, well, that didn't have to happen. We could have just ended the scene there and then cut to the next thing. And, you know, I don't fault Jay for that, because you never know when something brilliant is going to come out. But it was just, in that moment, I strongly remember something happening that I did not want to happen and could not justify why it happened in character. Param, do you have any thoughts on Dead Space? I know you were saying that as a player, you like to give the GM opportunity by doing these characterful moments. But what about as a GM? How often do you toss it to the players to just fill up the time, get into character?
I always try to toss it to the players between each action scene. Like if there's a big important plot point, I try to have immediately or soon thereafter a lull point where it is definitely character focused. I mean, a lot of the ways I run my games is kind of just throwing out little opportunities and nuggets constantly towards different characters that would fit what I can tell is what they're wanting out of a game. And so anytime I need to fill dead space, it's just I throw one of those nuggets in the air and then let the players go for them. And then, you know, if I can have 45 minutes of the characters making that game for themselves, that's great. But when I notice that something has looped, like an argument or a plan or a scene has basically repeated itself, or it's not going anywhere anymore, that's when I throw down a warning that the world moves on without you, or there's something urgent, or now it's time to roll for initiative, or anything to just catalyze, move that group forward. Because new ideas are fun. Arguing for 45 minutes about how to raid the fortress, not fun.
The loop. That's a really good way of looking at it.
Mm-hmm. It's one thing you can do that I learned from having done it as a player, actually. We were playing Kingmaker. There's a fort at the end of the first book that you have to deal with. And rather than prep or figure out our plan at the table, we stopped right before we were going to head out. And we spent our entire week between the session as players talking with each other and figuring out our plans. Like, okay, what spells am I going to prep? What items are we going to prep? And that ended up avoiding that problem altogether by having all that planning happen off screen, if you will.
And that's why I really
go ahead.
I'm sorry. That's why I really like Blades in the Dark and some of the more modern games in things that have. I like introducing those concepts back into Pathfinder, where you, instead of prepping in advance, you prep retroactively. The players have, it's time to prep. That is not a scene that's played out, because any heist movie, they don't play out that scene. That scene gets played out during the actual heist sequence that explains how they are getting through things they're not supposed to get through. So that's how it will happen. Oh, it's time for us to plan for this. Stop. Everybody makes a bunch of skill checks to see how many quote unquote prep points they just got. And then they get to cash them in during the actual raid to basically mulligan through problems. It's like, oh, there's security here, but I bribed the guard yesterday, or I have this thing stashed in here. That's why I took off early, and they have to explain it how they earned that little prep point, or and how it was related to the skill they rolled. But that makes it moving, and then retroactive. It plays out just like every entertaining movie, and there's a reason those movies are done that way.
Saw a meme recently that tabletop role playing game is basically you spend 2 hours of your time making a plan, and then nobody sticks to the plan.
Right. Yep. That's exactly the problem.
Patron Jaina B asks, how does your style differ when running published content versus something original? I'll start here because it's a low note. I apologize more when I'm running published content because I make mistakes, or I'm worried I'm going to make a mistake, and so I stop and I read, and it just doesn't feel as natural. And I've definitely had fun running published content, but I don't feel like I'm GMing my style when I'm running a published adventure.
I keep the same style because I view the published content as just somebody else's outline of the adventure I might run, and I change the crap out of it. Like, I will cut whole chapters, throw NPCs completely this way and that. I don't stick to it like a rail. Like, this is a great resource to help me run a game. It is not a shackle to keep me running their game.
That's basically my same answer as well. So,
Katie board member John Godek says, how does your style differ when you run for friends versus others, such as at a con or society? How does it differ for novice players versus experienced ones? So, Luis, we just touched on this.
I am happy to support and help people out as much as they need at the table. So, you know, I would run stuff at conventions and like sometimes even for brand new players, and I'm happy to say, you know, hey, check your AC. I made an attack roll. Your AC should be about on the left side, you know, so and so far down on the page and stuff, and point out stuff like that. I've ran a game for my wife's friends when she was in grad school, and none of them had ever played it. So I took the time to rebuild the character sheets that were color coded, so all the offensive stats were in one section, all the defensive stats and all your skills were different colors. So I could say, oh, hey, roll for perception, look in the yellow section for your skills, and you can find it to make it all the easier. But when I'm running for my home group, my weekly group, I don't give them any help at all. I'd say, you should know by now. You've been playing this long enough, you can figure it out. I mean, obviously answer questions and stuff like that, but beyond that, yeah, I will help newer players or anyone else when it's not my home group. My home group is gonna have to deal with it on their own.
Yeah, when I'm GMing society or at cons, or especially with new players, I feel a bit like I'm advertising Pathfinder as we go. Mm-hmm. And so if something's coming up, a mechanic that needs explaining, I'll either be like, oh yeah, this is super cool, and then like explain what the mechanic is, and then go into a little bit of why I like that mechanic or why it's clever, how it applies to the themes, and make sure that they're always connecting what the rule is with why that rule creates that effect in this world. And if it's a rule that I don't like, I'll be like, okay, this is a complicated rule. This can trip people up. So let me just go over it. And I'll also just throw in, I don't know if there's a dull moment or if we're in a transition stage, I'll throw in anecdotes from my home game that I know are usually pretty crowd pleasing, and just remind them this is a communal experience. Like, use those anecdotes to kind of show them, like, it's okay to laugh. It's okay to have a good time. It's okay to do whatever experience I'm trying to craft at the table at the time. Whereas if I'm with friends, I'm not going to tell those anecdotes because they're usually the subjects of the anecdotes. But I'll also I'll throw in pop culture references that I know they'll appreciate, and I'll just be a little more myself.
I find myself, the only difference I really find, besides having to explain things more and enter teacher mode a little bit more, is I also have to enter teacher mode a little bit more, but not in the way that way. I find that I'm social moderator and more socially sensitive when I'm running a game in public or at a con or anything like that, for strangers, because I try to definitely diffuse situations that would be unpleasant for a player, such as somebody at the table trying to play another characters for them or that sort of thing. I'm definitely more referee than I am otherwise, and ditto for society games when I'm out there. And I don't have to do that with my home games because, with any group, it's a group of people I trust and are friends, and if not, then you're not in the group anymore. So that's an easy solution to have. The other different audience I have is when I'm performing. If I'm GMing for a show or I'm playing for a show, I'm less friendly. Not friendly. I don't make the game easier for people as much because that's part of the fun of watching it, is watching also the failure. So I pull less punches as a GM. As a player, I just try to prop up the other players and give everybody and react to when people throw out something. I react to it, and then when there's a lull, I throw something out. I definitely also make more mistakes intentionally if I'm doing a performance, because doing everything perfectly meta correctly is not always going to be the right, most entertaining thing to watch.
Interesting.
Like the perfect SWAT team analysis of a combat is not necessary right now.
Yeah, that one perfect SWAT team combat, some kind of bog monster where everyone just happened to have the perfect thing for its weaknesses, and we were all super well suited to its defenses, and we just destroyed that creature that Crystal had for us. That was kind of fun.
That was fun. That was definitely fun, but
as
accidental.
A change of
we
pace.
Didn't. Yeah,
no, that was definitely not planned.
I'm pretty sure most of until we got Ogdrin, a lot of those were various ones of us face tanking things we shouldn't be, and everything going disaster.
Yeah, and trying to tactically optimize. Whereas once we got Ogdrin, it's like, oh, good, I can play with my more fun options rather than trying to make sure that I'm always doing the best option. All right, Katie Stafford Dustin has a series of questions for us. Do you have any experience with freeform / no prep GMing?
Boy, do
we. Actually, you know what? I think we've covered most of them, because then the next one is about high prep GMing. Thanks, Dustin, but we covered most of them. Oh, I like this one. What is your favorite Paizo published adventure you've run, and what about it really helped you as a GM?
This is tough.
Okay, you think about it. I've got my answer. Oh no, you're good.
Yeah, Random Winter's my favorite by far. It's just especially the first half of it, when it's all this is weird Russian inspired folktale stuff, and it's a whole lot of fish out of water stories, and slowly realizing that you're making the deal between two devils and it's not going to go well no matter what happens. It's a very fun time and it also gave a lot of opportunities for a game that is all about being nowhere near your hometown ever. It lets characters really get a lot of role play and repeat character interaction in very creative ways. I was extremely impressed with how well that was put together.
So I picked Rise of the Goblin Guild, which is the season 4 scenario 1 from first edition of Pathfinder Society. You are escorting a variety of goblins that are trying to get in good with the society. And you have a number of the goblins, but you have no personality, you have no names or anything. And so I had a lot of fun making sure each of those goblins was unique. My favorite of which was a goblin that could only say, "This stupid goblin will never learn common," but he would say it in the right emotional tone. So like at one point they were betrayed and this goblin was about to get killed, and he just turns to the PCs like, "This stupid goblin will never learn common." Whereas later when he was thanking them, it was like, "This stupid goblin will never learn common," pat on the shoulder. And every now and then a player in my game will interact on Facebook and he'll just reply with, "This stupid goblin will never learn common." And it's great because, like I was saying about being like an advertiser for Pathfinder, nothing advertised Pathfinder better than Pathfinder goblins. And so just being able to just full on be goblins for the entire scenario was super fun for me. And like I said, the creative freedom to define these goblins as I wanted to was super helpful. Luis, you've run everything Paizo's ever published, as far as I know.
Yeah, basically.
Multiple times even.
Yeah, in fact, a few of them. I think it all, like, every time someone asks me what my favorite adventure I've ever run was, I think it always comes back to the harrowing, which is just a great module because it's so creative. It just, I don't know, there's nothing like it at all. I mean, getting sucked into a dimension where you're in a harrow deck and all the getting to use all the imagery for that as inspiration for every set piece or NPC or some aspect of it. You know, I think it's masterfully done to be able to pull on that, and it worked great in my Curse of the Crimson Throne campaign when I needed a side trek, and it turned out it was just really awesome to run, and it had a lot of memorable characters that had. I mean, I know that there's only so much space on a page and so many words you can attribute to anything, but I think that every nugget of information that was tied to an NPC was well done. That let me just kind of riff off that and build off of it and make really interesting NPCs. So it just maximizes every bit of space that it has, and I think it's really great. And so much that I like have become like, I haven't let go of the Harrow since. I've always wanted to like do more and more stuff with it. I ended up like writing an article for it in AP Back Matter a couple months ago, and like keep trying to sneak it in wherever I can, just because I like it so much after having run that adventure.
That is an adventure I own and want to either play or run. I haven't read it because I don't know if I'm going to be the player or the GM.
You should have Crystal run it for you.
I mean, that's nice. She already runs a lot for us.
I feel like she would know that one pretty well.
Anyway, I'm making plans in my head when I should be hosting. All right, we have a couple more questions. One is from patron Litis. Do you work best with a single theme and plot for a campaign, or do you prefer to structure your games episodically with lots of mini adventures, each with a different flavor?
Oh, number 2.
Okay.
Yeah, like my GM style when I pitch it to people to try and I run games like Saturday morning cartoons, or I guess now just really good cartoons, because that's what they are now.
You can watch them anytime.
Yeah. I run my games like well done cartoons. I hope, and so I like every session has its arc. Every few sessions has their like overarching arc. There's A plots and B plots. And then, yeah, there is a long running goals and quote unquote the campaign. But I find that I enjoy more repeated payoffs, storytelling payoffs, and focusing more on the characters and the repeated characters that they interact with. So the player characters and the NPCs that they happen to figure. Like I try to guess because I know my players, so I do prep a bunch of NPCs that I think that they'll become the recurring cast. But I just latch on to whichever ones they latch on to, and then let them shine. And that's how I run my games. I like that way. There's a variety of stories to be told, a variety of experiences to be had. Like even when I'm prepping a long-term campaign, like right now I'm getting ready to prep my next long-term campaign, which is going to be for a small adventure group, which is for a future episode. And it's the reason I'm painting all these vampires, really. It's going to be an undead campaign, and I only really have the first arc down that I want, but I want it to be this basic episodic thing that's basically a 28 days later situation where the players are in this besieged town surrounded by vampires and undead, and I want to play on those emotions and getting to know those characters and protecting these immigrants from a war-torn region. And that's the kind of the flavors I'm going to be going after. But I know that's not going to last for a whole campaign. That's just the adventure arc I'm going to go with. And then the next arc will be something different.
So I like a wide net. I like a lot of callbacks, and I like a lot of breadcrumbs. And I tend to create a giant overarching plot for the whole campaign, which I know may sound contradictory since I don't do much prep. But no, like I use a lot of time travels to do a lot of cheating. But like the first long-term campaign that we finally completed, by the end of it, there was this cult called the Six-Fingered Gauntlet. By the end, we'd seen all 6 members of it. By the end, we realized one of the cult members was masquerading as the leader of this group, the Keyholders, which was like an adventuring union that really didn't like the freewheeling PCs. And so when that guy left, suddenly that union just fell apart without its leadership, without its direction, and just all these things that were disparate and made it feel like it was episodic. By the last couple of sessions, they all showed up one last time. They all had their plot resolved. They all made it realize how everything converged. And then we had that final session with the final confrontation with the Six-Fingered Gauntlet. And that's basically most of my campaigns have been learning from that. Something that happened in the first session is important to the last session. So when I ran the world's largest city, we never finished it, but the first thing we did was a Titan showed up and destroyed the world's largest city. And then this group of PCs went back in time for a week. And that was the campaign. It's like, now you know there's a Titan on his way. He's planning on destroying the city. Figure out why. Otherwise, the world's largest city has no plot. And it was just kind of one of the most disappointing purchases I've ever made. I also, I had one that started in a city that seemed completely disconnected. I told the players, make these characters. You will never see these characters again. They are going to die at the end of the first session, and then we'll get onto the real campaign. And so it was just seemed completely disconnected, except for there was this one guy, Ludicrous Stilts, named after Brian Stilts, who was in our game, Luis, who had this library made of sand, who could just kind of fly in and out and just give the players a pep talk and give them a little clue about some weird greater thing that's happening. And then by the end, they arrive in this new city that happens to be built over the city where the original PCs got killed. And it is once again a time travel point where they can embody the lives of those players that they played in the first session. They can also zap forward to there was like a moon was going to crash into that area, and we would have destroyed the whole city. So there was like 4 different points of time that they were traveling to, all of which were familiar to the characters because of some other thing that had happened in the campaign. And that was actually one of the only campaigns I ended without a combat. It was just about figuring out the puzzle of the 4 different timelines and resolving that, so that what was happening in the past, and then like basically everything lined up so that it made the most sense and prevented this moon from crashing into the ground.
I'm curious, how long are your campaigns?
I don't know, actually. Sometimes I think about that and it's like, was that a couple of years? That must have been years. A lot happened, but I don't really keep track of it. And when I'm playing, I like, because most things it's like, oh, well, what else was happening in my life at that time? And I don't have those touchstones. So when I'm running the campaign, it's just I'm in that campaign, I'm in the campaign mode, and then I go back to my life. So I'm not positive, but I would say about 2 years each.
So that's about how long my AP campaigns are, and I consider those my short terms.
Okay.
So my normal campaigns that I'm doing for my home groups are usually like ongoing for 5-10 years, and I can't keep an overarching campaign going that long. I guess that's why I would go back to episodic.
Okay.
Well, yeah, the campaign goes on, but there's not just one constant story. That's why it's episodic. It's that, and eventually themes do crop up and stuff, but it's like where I don't have an end. Like the campaigns are started without an end point in mind, because it's about telling these short stories and then stringing them together, and that's why I lean that way. Whereas with the APs, one of the reasons I do get a little bit burned out on them is that they definitely are this humongous story arc that has an end point. Everything's leading to it, and that is great, but you can't stretch that out for 10 years.
Right. Well, it's not like I specifically set a timeline of like in 2 years this will be when we wrap up. It's just kind of when it feels like I've got enough components that can now be meshed together, and when it feels like we are, talking about character ideas for whenever we do the next campaign, like when it feels like the group is ready to move on, that's when the campaign starts to wrap up, and that re-engages the players for one final stretch.
Luis?
Yep.
I think I do a bit of both. I tend to have end goals in mind, but kind of throw in whatever and try to find a way to tie it all together by the end of things. This is a thing I really had fun doing when I was homebrewing during the 4E D&D days. when we would get together for, hey, Player's Handbook 2 is out. Let's make characters. Let's try them out. Let's figure out, what these characters are. And I would eventually, like, we'd had our main campaign going on. And what would happen is, all right, let's do like a fun little jaunt where we try out these new characters. And by the end of this little one shot, it turns out, oh, this ties back to this adventure we had many months ago. And this NPC that that you knew with your main characters now becomes your friend here, and it all kind of ends up tying back together, and you can bring all the characters back, partially because we were playing in a style that was similar to Pathfinder Society. We had like a guild in our setting that let us round robin GM and hop in and out as needed. And so what would happen is, like, well, people are making all these other characters, I need to tie them all back to the same guild by the end of it. So if they decide, like, oh, I'm tired of playing my wizard, I'm going to play this other character that I built, there's already a connection built in there, so we don't have to rope them into the campaign and be like, well, how did we meet you and all that stuff. No, you're all just part of the same guild. It works out. So it was fun to do that, and kind of, as stuff would happen, as these little events would happen, it would also inspire me for, like, well, maybe I'll tweak this ending, or like put another specific story bit further down the line, because that will connect to things. And it kind of helps me flesh out the ideas for the future by having random ideas earlier on that I can then kind of tie into a greater narrative. So that's kind of what's happening with Valiant, is I kind of have an end game for Valiant. I have no idea what it all happens between the start of Valiant and there, but I'm slowly getting ideas and putting that together in hopes to hopefully have a cohesive narrative by the end of it, when that's all said and done.
Just got a question from chat. Aaron the Paisley, specifically for you, Param. What are Param's rules for GMPCs?
Interesting. I do have set rules for these characters, especially when I end up running smaller groups. I usually do have companion characters with the group just for necessity's sake. These games usually assume a certain minimum player count for some of the pre-written stuff. But whenever you have a companion character for the party, I always make sure that it's a supporting character, not just, and I don't just mean that it's a cleric, because that's the easiest way to say it's a supporting character. It's the cleric. But what I mean is it supports the characters in both the story in the game and the goals of the campaign, as well as what they're trying to get out of the game. So it helps build them up and show off the player characters and make them have fun more so than never steals spotlight. It's always throwing the spotlight. It only, like, it'll react if the players give it the spotlight, but it always tries to tie the characters into that. Sometimes it can be a font of knowledge, but only when asked by the players, and definitely it needs to not have perfect knowledge, so that it's not just, I mean, Hermione Granger kind of works as a support character, but it definitely falls flat if it's relied upon too much. And also the players have veto power over any actions it has, so that, to the point that if they want to, they can just grab its token in combat and start directing it, because it's meant to be an aid to them. And also, never have a GM PC or a companion PC that you want that breaks trust. Like, this, no backstabbing involved with them, because you can only ever do that once, and it's usually never worth it. So if you do have a character that's going to come in that's going to be all backstabby, maybe make it kind of clear from the start, this one might be kind of backstabby.
But what you can do, though, is kidnap that GM PC and get a
lot
of
heat
all the time.
It's wonderful. Once they care about it. I had one that was just like the kid's sidekick character that one of the characters wanted, and then, like, it took a bolt to the leg, and they freaked out. It's like, oh, its face got scarred because of terrible fireballs that happened. And be careful how much you twist those heartstrings and stuff, but it's definitely a way to motivate the character. This works for any characters they get attached to, by the way. They might not care about saving the world, but they will definitely care about saving Aunt Petunia.
There was in that guild setup game I had, there was the same driver every time that would drive the cart to deliver them to wherever they needed to do their quests. Mr. Astley. And eventually there was a point where it's like, all right, I'm going to introduce a big villain and I'm going to make sure it hurts. So he blows up the cart and Mr. Astley gets slightly burned and is like, hurt for like 2 days, but they're like, no, I can't believe it. And they went for it, and it was great to manipulate them, as you mentioned earlier.
Slightly burnt.
Yeah,
That's
just
all
like
it took.
he got hurt a little bit, and any threat on Mr. Astley was just enough to get them motivated.
Yeah. Also,
Jam.
there's like I like that you burnt the character and you express danger on it. It's like the old Uncle Figgy's guide. If I don't know if any of you all have read it, it's an old guide to game mastering that got passed around a lot. I even saw like the Robbins Laws version of it got that's very similar was printed. I saw an in print version of this at my game store recently. But one of the advices that they both give is like if the player has a favorite car, yeah, you can blow up the car or you could kill the car, and that's good for once. But you can have so much more fun if you scratch the paint. Oh, that's going to be from the character they have to escort is violently ill in the back seat. Oh, that's going to be some problems. Oh, shot out the window. Like, where are you going to find a replacement vintage hood ornament now?
Patron Jana B, any tips on bringing a PC's backstory into a pre-published adventure?
It can be hard. Like, make sure that if the character wrote the backstory with the adventure in mind, definitely make sure they know what they're coming. It's easier. But sometimes it just can't, and you need to be honest with the character too. It's like any game is about give and take, and if you're running a pre-published adventure and it's like this is okay, Reign of Winter, it's going to start here, we're going to go here, it's going to be all thing. You're not going to have time. There's never going to be an opportunity for your character to engage with his estranged family in Varisia. That's just never going to be part of the scope of this. That's one thing. But if they know about it and they're willing to work with you and it will work with the adventure, I definitely say embrace it and alter the adventure to get it in there because it helps engage them. And anything that can tie characters into the adventure, especially pre-published adventures, helps make them more rich. But it's a two-way street.
I think if you ask the player for a specific goal, it can help out a lot more rather than just being like, here's my backstory. It features the old baron that, ridiculed my family and ruined our lives. But like, if you have a specific goal, like, I would like to get back at that baron, or I want to build up our family again and reclaim our noble title or something, that's something that is a little easier to weave in than it is just like, here's nebulous character or nebulous ideas from my backstory that you figure out how to implement them. Having a goal. I had a character for my Kingmaker campaign. He had his mom, and he moved all the way to the Stolen Lands to do this stuff. And he's like, eventually, I'd like to have my mom live with me. So I spent some of my character money, like getting her a house and all this stuff, and worked with my GM to get that working. I mean, it wasn't an amazing like I gotta seek revenge, Inigo Montoya style kind of thing, but like having that clearly in mind meant it was easier for the GM to work in on like, oh, they built this plot of land and maybe now you can buy this house and stuff. Like, cool. So if there is that evil baron, maybe you can just have like there's a pre-written NPC, maybe replace them with the evil baron, and the evil baron's now also working with the overarching villain of the piece. Or if there was a thief or something in your backstory, just swap in an NPC with this character. Or hey, as a reward for helping out this other NPC, maybe your reward is a claim to a new plot of land that you can use to build your new manor and regain your noble title and stuff. So something like that, I think, is a little easier to weave in when you have like something to work toward.
So Matt once complimented me for how I've worked his characters' backstories into the adventures, and that's funny to me because I did not. These things have a way of happening naturally. And a couple of examples I can think of is in a Kingmaker campaign, I was playing Geralite, who was like 50th from the throne. And so that's why when there was a chance to actually have some kind of political power, she went to the Stolen Lands and she became like the leader of the group. And then one of the NPCs you interact with is a lazy noble from a neighboring city.
Mhm.
And it's clearly written that you're just supposed to be really mad at him. But whenever anyone else in the PC insinuated he was failing at his duties as a noble, Jerry would just stick up for him. And it's like, but as his birthright, he is well within his rights. And it's like, that scene played out uniquely because of who Jerry was, who my character was. And similarly, when we were playing in Carrion Crown and I was playing Walter, who was a guy who killed his entire village because there was some kind of madness curse that was on it, and it was the only way he could escape. So he picked up his ripsaw glaive and he cut off everybody's heads and he left. And then, like in book 5 of that adventure path, there's a whole section where you can gain madness. Basically, this was unintentional, but there was a similar madness curse that Walter was afflicted with and then was cured of. And he was like, maybe I should not have killed everyone. Maybe I should have considered there was ways of healing them. And so the adventure path was run exactly as it was written, but because my character had these elements in his backstory that played out with the scene, with the plot, the character was then integrated into what was going on, and no, the GMs didn't have to make any effort to work it in. And finally, Patron Dom, how badly mauled should the party be at the end of the day? So I actually like this question quite a bit because I do believe it's a question about how challenging should your encounters be. But the idea that there is a quota of just how beat up a character should be at the end of a session kind of tells me a lot about how Dom is approaching his campaigns. So I'm curious, Param, I've heard your thoughts on this. So why don't we start with you? How beat up should the party be at the end of an encounter, the end of a session?
They should think they're more beat up than they are.
Okay,
you
fair.
should definitely play up the danger that they weren't in.
Luis?
Depends. How recently were they really beat up before? Like, if the last session ended up with them making it by the skin of their teeth, maybe give them a session or two to do well, or you know, they fight dinky little bandits for a bit and they get to feel good for a moment, but end with it hinting that, oh, but the next fight you're going to get into, you're going to get so mauled and beat up. So, you know, ebbs and flows. Give them a chance to do well, and then you can beat them up a lot, and it feels great because they made it, and then they kind of repeat the cycle of, for a while things are tough, but then things are good, and then things are tough and things are good. Otherwise, if they get beat up every single time and always make it by the skin of their teeth, it becomes arduous, and you know, it's tiring, it's exhausting to have to play to your ultimate strength just to make it by every single time. And I think sometimes it's okay to just win and feel cool, or do something exciting and fun that is very easy and simple.
If it's the beginning or end of the season, very beat up. And if it's in the middle, they should be strutting their stuff.
Yeah. Interesting you should say season, because I was about to say that I used to enjoy Dexter, the TV show about the serial killer who would really like ritualistically kill evil people.
Right. And fantastic family show.
There were a couple of seasons in a row where it was just, it would hit the ground running. He would just be met with challenge after challenge. And it's like, it's been like 6 episodes since we've seen Dexter's ritual. Yes, this is an intriguing story, but I'm also here for the ritual. And so it just felt like Dexter needed a couple more wins peppered in there. And so that's kind of like what Luis was saying about ebbing and flowing, of making sure that they are here to show off their cool powers. They don't have to use all of their top level spells to get through every single encounter. Give them some where you just remind them that you are heroes of this setting and that you are kind of the boss around here for a little bit. And then you challenge them.
I think the best way to do that is sometimes threaten a mauling, and then it turns out it's not a mauling. I just ran a scenario for my players where the whole time there's not an entire combat till the very end, and they get ready to fight this thing, and just by chance, I mean, I didn't plan this, but just by chance, the creature is a big construct, and it's on its first turn it tries to use trample, and it gets stopped, and it can't move at all because someone's reaction prevented that from happening. So it doesn't do anything. And at the end of the second round, it's been destroyed. So you know what? Sometimes a big threatening a mauling and then having an actual like Oh, it turns out the players are delivering the mauling is even more exciting.
Dom is actually in chat, and he's just said that he's a very kind GM. He mauls only with affection.
Base of healing doesn't count.
So I had one other thing that I was thinking we could cover in this episode, but I think it's about time that we wrap things up, and I will save that for maybe a vlog or another time. I'll go into more details. Though. Yeah, of course, we have time for shoutouts.
So we'll be right back with shoutouts.
Right after this. Thank you for joining us for episode 248 of No Direction, the No Direction Network's Pathfinder News, Reviews, and Interviews podcast. Thank you to our guest, Luis Loza. He provided a lot of great insight. It was fun to have Luis, wasn't it, Perrin?
Yeah, very fun. Always glad to have Luis.
Yeah.
Fun to be here.
It's like he's still here. Yes, normally the guest is gone by now, but Luis, you are more than welcome. Actually, you are a guest co-host. You are not a guest on the podcast, so you are completely entitled to join us for the shoutouts, where we talk about things that are of interest to us that we think our fans would appreciate. So I usually like to start by shouting out to a couple of things that have been happening on the network itself. So first, shout out to Jessica Redicop. She was a cast member. She is now a staff member on the network. I posted a blog post explaining the very small and nuanced difference between the two, but it is a promotion. Anyway, it is Jessica committing more of her time to the network, and that is very much appreciated. She is an extremely talented player and freelancer, and I appreciate everything she does with you on Valiant. Luis is one of your players, and I'm really glad that she's committed to the network that much more. And I'm also going to shout out to one of our podcasts from this week, and it is the latest episode of Presenting Gamers Making Games by John Godek, where we had Jeff Grubb on. And Jeff Grubb is definitely a name I've recognized, both from just stories and from credits in a lot of RPGs that I've read and run over the years. But to hear him just kind of summarize his career in a 50-minute conversation, it was fun. There was a real energy to the conversation, and he's just seen and done so much. So if you haven't checked out the Presenting Gamers Making Games featuring Jeff Grubb, it is last week's episode, and I recommend it. I really enjoyed it. I felt like I learned a lot. Param, you know I have a couple more shout outs, but before I do that, anything you want to talk about?
Well, let's talk about the big one, Path Builder.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes. So Path Builder is fantastic software. I've got a review of it on the network. I definitely recommend y'all go look, where I call it the best Pathfinder 2 character creator, and I'm no reservation there. It's incredibly easy to use. But one complaint was always it's Android only. It's not even on iOS. Well, now it's on the web. And now any web browser can use Path Builder, and it's in beta. It's definitely got some features held back. You can't do animal companions yet, and not all of the books are in here. Mostly the most newest of the new, but it is just as easy to use as it has been. It is silly fast to tap out a character on this and get it exported to play the game. I've got like a 5-minute Glanville on here right now on the screen, and I love it. It's wonderful. It's free. Go check it out. It's pathbuilder2e.com.
Say that not all the books are on there. I was just making a Flesh Warp Swashbuckler. So that's the APG and Lost Omens Ancestry Guide, which are both fairly recent books. So the Ancestry Guide's the most recent, right?
Yeah, so that is a great example of how fast the creator moves on this, because that was not true a few days ago.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, this is usually updated before anything else. Like Archive of Nethys beats them, and that's about it.
And they cheat by having access to stuff early. And it's not cheating at all. It's a partnership that they have with Prysa.
Mm-hmm.
We love the Archives of Nethys. I would never sincerely speak ill of them.
Right.
Luis, anything you want to shout out to?
Yeah, I'll shout out to a few different things. Recently, YouTuber No Nat Ones, who I enjoy his
Ooh.
content. He had a video where he talked about his thoughts on the wizard. Eventually, someone else in the community discussed with like, "Oh, here are my thoughts on the wizard," and I feel like maybe you're not considering these cool things about the wizard. And then No Nets had a response video to that where he says, "That's great, I love it," and he enjoys the discussion. He kind of points out that
Mm-hmm.
he'd love to see more people in the Pathfinder 2e community doing videos and reviews and blogs and stuff like that. And I think that's a great sentiment. I want more people talking about the game, if only just talking about, I'm excited to play my new campaign and here's the character I'm playing, let me show off my character, stuff like that is great. So that, go check out No Nat Ones on YouTube, and he has a huge list of all these other great content creators you can follow. Speaking of content creation, I think another person you should check out, which is Owen Casey Stevens. You may have heard of him.
Oh.
He recently, with permission, took my own words and put them onto his blog. There, someone was asking about getting into freelance writing for RPGs, and I kind of hopped in on Twitter and explained, like, here's some tips I have for you, and he took the time to grab them all together into a nice little blog post at onkcstevens.com. There's a blog post on April 12th where he kind of replicates everything I wrote there, and gives you a bunch of ideas for like how to get started, and what to work for, and what things to do to help you get going on that path if you're interested. So via Owen, you have my words telling you how to get started in the RPG business. And then I guess because I'm not here in a professional capacity, I'm here as just me, Luis Loza, this time around. Hey, how about hopping over to luisloza.com and considering checking out my Patreon, where I think the most recent thing I did was write a dragon, like half dragon heritage for players for it's not done yet. I haven't touched it in a few weeks, but all the rules are there and all the ancestry feats are there and all the heritages. So if you wanted to be a partly dragon, it works a lot like the Beastkin, where you choose a dragon type and get all the cool stuff from it as you level up. So claws and wings and a breath weapon and all that fun stuff. And I hope to do new cool stuff with runes here in the next few weeks, where I come up with a bunch of fun runes for that. So if you're interested in Pathfinder 2e content, I feel like I know the rules pretty well, so I'm gonna point people to that to get new stuff.
I want to shout out to somebody else who knows their rules pretty well and is a PF2 content creator, the Deadly D8 channel over on YouTube. They do short little videos featuring sometimes very obscure parts of the rules, like the Manifold Missile Wand and the Celebrity Archetype. They do it with animation, like still frame animation style, which is wonderful. And I wanted to also at this point share with you one of their more recent productions that kind of went a little bit viral, which is the Bag of Weasels.
It's just a bag of holding, Peril. A show from Gimlet. It stars Alex Goldman and PJ Vogt, who are the hosts of Reply All. PJ Vogt is a self-admitted not fan of horror movies. He's completely he gets extremely anxious about horror movies, but he wanted to watch the movie Get Out because it was a cultural phenomenon. And so Alex Goldman, his co-host, curated a series of movies for him that would gradually get scarier and prep him for watching Get Out. And then the podcasts were just them talking about it. So it was like a 6-episode series that covers some of my favorite movies, in fact. And eventually they do have a really interesting, nuanced conversation about Get Out itself in the final episode. Sorry for spoilers. They do actually watch the movie that the whole podcast was built around watching. It was a fun sidetrack that if I shouted out to Reply All a few weeks ago as a source of a lot of my ideas, and they fill my bag of auxiliary brain content. So this was seeing them a little bit more naturally, which was fun, and also hearing them talking about movies, which was really cool. So it is the Scaredy Cat horror show from Gimlet. And finally, I can't believe I have not shouted out to this year yet, but Larda Souza, who does the art for the Blind Ferret comics, my parent, the company that owns my parent company. I no longer work for Blind Ferret. I work for Laughing Dragon Studio. I still work for Blind Ferret. It's all the same thing, basically, as far as companies I work for is concerned. So Lar, every year around this time, does charity avatars. He does custom avatars set to themes in exchange for donations to the MS Society fundraiser he does every year. So right now the theme is Mario, and if you would like a custom avatar of you mashed up with a Mario-verse character, you can send $40 to his MS Society fundraiser, which the link is tinyurl.com/mscure2021. And then you email him a copy of the receipt to prove that you've given the donation, and give him some instructions of what character you would like and some pictures of yourself. If you go to my Facebook right now, you see me mashed up with Princess Peach, because I am a princess, and she was the best character in Super Mario Brothers 2, which I don't care, was one of my favorite games. I don't care what people say about Super Mario Brothers 2. It is a game I loved growing up. And
it's a well-beloved game.
No, it's not. It's the weird one.
That's like old gamer talk.
Okay,
like,
you know what?
Let's save that for the
Patriots Private Sanctum.
Okay.
Speaking of which, Pam.
Yes, indeed. If none of the No Direction Network would be possible without support of our patrons. And if you would like to support the network, we very much appreciate it. You can do so at the Patreon link at nodirectionpodcast.com. While you're there, you'll also see the Discord link, where you will be able to join the chillest community of Starfinder and Pathfinder and general gaming fans. You'll be able to talk with all our fans, as well as most of the network. We're pretty much on there all day, and it's a great place to interact. And also, while you're there, after every single episode of No Direction, we have our Private Sanctum, which is our Patreons only after party, which if all you have to do is link your Discord to your Patreon account, support us on Patreon, and then you'll be able to hop into that voice channel and the patron chat channel and basically hang out with us for the after party. It is the show that is for and driven by the Patreons. You tell us what you want us to talk about, that's what we talk about.
Luis, we're about to wrap up. After Pam and I say goodbye, you, as the third guest co-host, get to say goodbye as well.
Great.
Until next time.
Yay!
I'm Ryan Costello.
I'm Jefferson J. Thacker, also known as Param.
I'm Luis Loza.
And if you want to find the path, you need no direction.